Dear students, I welcome you all to this lecture. Today, we shall talk about the colonial legacy on development administration. Some of the key objectives of this lecture are to understand the relationship between colonial legacy and development administration, to understand characteristics of development administration, to examine how colonial policies contribute to socio-economic disparities, focusing on lasting divisions, to understand about the colonial legacy on institutional development in India, a case study, and challenges of colonial legacies in development administration. Now let's start the lecture. Colonial legacy, a complex and enduring phenomenon, casts a profound shadow over the development trajectories of nations that once grappled with colonial rule. This legacy, rooted in the historical experiences of subjugation and exploitation, manifests itself across various dimensions of post colonial existence. Development administration, situated within this broader context, encapsulates the ongoing struggle of nations in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America to achieve living standards akin to those in the West, while contending with the lingering influences of colonial institutions. Scholars such as Huck assert that the consequences of colonialism persist, shaping the development, maturity, and overall performance of formerly colonized nations. Debates surrounding the nature of these legacies abound, with some scholars emphasizing negative impacts on development, particularly within institutional frameworks. Burke, for instance, highlights the undermining effect of inherited colonial bureaucratic institutions on administrative states in Africa, citing their rigidity as a persistent hindrance. In the realm of local governance, Cooperman and Rosenberg underscore how colonial legacies, characterized by highly centralized and aloof administrative patterns, contribute to ineffective local government and authoritarian role behaviors. Economic and social affairs are not exempt, as critics argue that European colonizers viewed their colonies primarily as economic assets to exploit for the benefit of the colonial powers. However, dissenting voices challenge the uniformly negative narrative surrounding colonialism's legacy. Lange and Moradi, for instance, present arguments suggesting positive impacts of British colonialism, positing that the effects were not universally detrimental. Moradi contends that Ghana and Kenya under British rule experienced significant benefits, refuting the notion that colonial legacy solely determines underdevelopment in former colonies. He emphasizes the role of post independent policies in shaping developmental outcomes. While debates persist on the overall impact of colonial legacies, scholars like Greer and Young assert that by the early 1990s, the influence of colonialism had waned. Maslin further suggests that post independence, nations increasingly followed developmental paths shaped by their own characteristics rather than the colonial origins. Nevertheless, the resilience of colonial legacies is evident in ongoing global dynamics, with former colonial powers exerting influence over their former territories. British, French, and Spanish influences persist in various regions, contributing to the ongoing relevance of colonial history in shaping current affairs, particularly in the realms of social, cultural, economic, and political arenas. Against this backdrop, this discussion does not seek to conclusively determine the dominance of any particular school of thought in the colonialism debate. Instead, its primary objective is to explore the impact of colonial legacies on development administration, examining the establishment and effectiveness of bureaucratic apparatuses in former colonies, and their role in promoting or hindering desired development outcomes. Now, let's have a look on colonial legacy and development administration. The term development administration entered the realm of public administration and management vocabulary in 1955, gaining prominence after the World War II. According to scholars Dwivedi and Neff, the Indian academic Goswami first employed this term to characterize a cluster of nations that would later be recognized as the Third World. Subsequently, American scholars, united under the Comparative Public Administration Group, adopted the term to scrutinize newly independent states in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. It served as a means to distinguish the administrative focus on supporting and managing development from the traditional role of administration in maintaining law and order, particularly evident during the era of indirect rule under colonialism. Development administration, as initially conceptualized, referred to the instrumentalities through which economically disadvantaged nations in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America aimed to achieve living standards comparable to those of the West. Lauman explains that the Comparative Public Administration Group perceived development administration as encompassing not only a government's effort to implement programs reshaping physical, human, and cultural environments, but also as a struggle to enhance a government's capacity to engage in such transformative endeavors. Essentially, the concept emphasized the role of a robust government in fostering economic expansion and a more just society. Fredericks, a prominent figure in the early discussions on development administration, provided a twofold delineation of the concept. First, it pertains to the administration of development programs, encompassing the methods employed by large-scale organizations, particularly governments, to realize their developmental goals. Second, it implies, albeit indirectly, the enhancement of administrative capabilities. These definitions underscore the inseparability of state administrative capacity from the management of public programs. Regrettably, despite numerous efforts to build administrative capacity, issues pertaining to administrative capabilities persist as a challenge for developing countries. The responsibility for this challenge partly lies in the type of administration and bureaucratic institutions inherited by former colonies in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. This enduring issue underscores the significance of addressing administrative capacity as an integral aspect of effective development administration in these regions. Now, let's have a look on the characteristics of development administration. The identification and understanding of the essential characteristics of development administration have been a subject of scholarly discourse, with no unanimous consensus among scholars. In exploring this lecture, we will focus on the 16 characteristics outlined by Rathod, which encapsulated key aspects of the concept and align with observations made by other scholars. The first characteristic emphasized by the Rathod is change orientation, signifying the imperative of moving a system or structure from one state to another rather than maintaining the status quo. This involves a strategic approach to enhance the administrative system's capacity, both internally and in relation to the external environment. The change sought encompasses not only structural adjustments but also a transformation of administrators' attitudes, outlooks, and orientations to bring about comprehensive socio-economic development. Secondly, Rathod highlights result orientation, underscoring the need for swift socio-economic change within a specified time frame for societal benefit. The third characteristic, commitment, emphasizes administrators' dedication to facilitating and expediting development, extending beyond the mere execution of development programs to encompass the broader process of social transformation and modernization. The fourth characteristic, that is client or people orientation, underscores the importance of a close relationship between the public and administration. This involves prioritizing the needs of program beneficiaries and formulating policies, programs, and actions to meet those needs. Rathod's fifth characteristic introduces the temporal dimension, emphasizing the time constraints inherent in development administration, where essential changes must be implemented within specified time frames. The sixth characteristic, planned and coordinated efforts, emphasizes organized endeavors to execute development programs and projects involving the coordination of various institutions and agents in society. The seventh, goal-oriented administration, centers on the purposeful execution of developmental activities. Management capacities, Rathod's eighth characteristics, are deemed fundamental to development administration, necessitating the creation and enhancement of management capabilities to achieve development goals. The ninth characteristic, that is progressivism, involves the continuous training and development of administrators to prepare them for future challenges in light of evolving technology and methods. Rathod's 10th characteristic, that is participation, advocates for increased public involvement in public affairs, expecting development administration to foster conditions conducive to active participation in economic and social development processes. The 11th characteristic, creativity and innovativeness, stresses the ability to generate new ideas and apply them to problem solving within the realm of development administration. Rathod's 12th characteristic, that is responsiveness and accountability, distinguishes development administration from traditional administration by requiring administrators to be dynamic, innovative, and development conscious, responsive, and accountable in planning and administering development activities. People-centered administration, that is Rathod's 13th characteristic, which emphasizes a focus on serving the population with development programs and projects crafted by planners. The 14th characteristic, keeping in touch with social realities, underscores the importance of administrators understanding grassroots situation and local problems to better address societal needs. Rathod's final two characteristics, that's overlapping and heterogeneity of forms and institutions, acknowledge the complexities of developing societies with overlapping institutional forms and behavioral patterns. Administrators must navigate this intricate by finding a delicate balance between their social and official roles. In summary, Rathod's delineation of the essential characteristics of development administration provides a comprehensive framework that encompasses a proactive approach to change, time sensitive results, commitment, client oriented focus, planned efforts, goal oriented administration, management capacities, progressivism, participation, creativity, responsiveness, accountability, people centered administration, awareness of social realities, and an understanding of the overlapping and heterogeneous nature of forms and institutions in developing societies. Now, let's have a look on instrumentality of colonial policies in contributing towards socio-economic disparities. Colonial policies have been instrumental in shaping enduring socio-economic disparities, leaving a lasting imprint on numerous countries across the globe. The resource extraction practices of colonial powers significantly contributed to economic imbalances, with countries such as India experiencing the depletion of valuable commodities and wealth concentration during British colonial rule. Economic dependence, a legacy of colonialism, continues to plague countries like Nigeria, where reliance on a limited range of industries makes them susceptible to global market fluctuations. Land disposition policies have had profound and lasting impacts, as seen in South Africa, where apartheid era land policies led to the concentration of land ownership among a privileged few, perpetuating inequalities. Social hierarchies established during colonial rule persist in countries like Zimbabwe, contributing to disparities in education, employment, and social mobility. The infrastructure imbalances created by colonial investments are evident in many Latin American nations, where transportation networks were often developed to facilitate resource extraction rather than inclusive development. The imposition of colonial languages, educational systems, and cultural norms has marginalized local cultures in countries like Indonesia, affecting educational opportunities and hindering economic participation. Economic policies and debts inherent from colonial rulers continue to shape the economic trajectories of post colonial nations, as seen in the Caribbean countries burdened by historical debts. Institutional frameworks, remnants of colonial governance, pose ongoing challenges in countries like Nigeria, where outdated structures hinder effective governance and contribute to socio-economic disparities. Addressing these enduring divisions necessitates country specific approaches that acknowledge the historical context and strive for inclusive and equitable development tailored to each nation's unique challenges. Now, students, let's have a look on the colonial legacy on institutional development in India, a case study. The British exerted direct administrative control over the Indian subcontinent from 1857 to 1947. Following a period of more indirect control by the British East India Company, which commenced around 1757 in Bengal. This prolonged foreign rule led to significant structural change in the economic and political system of the Indian subcontinent. Even though these changes officially concluded with India's independence in 1947. The impacts of British colonialism persist in contemporary India. This analysis focuses on the modern state of India, which, despite political divisions post independence, still retains an active central government. The British Raj unified the diverse Indian subcontinent under a central government, a departure from its historically decentralized districts with distinct economic systems. The British introduced a land tenure system to generate revenue from India, assigning property rights to landlords, village communities, or individual cultivators. This system, abolished post independence, resulted in the restructuring of class divisions and contributed to diverse institutional arrangements, impacting local development. The effects of colonial land tenure persist in established local institutions, affecting asset distribution and political representation. The dominance of British rule facilitated the spread of European economic ideology and practices in India, fostering capitalism and commercialization, especially in industries like agriculture. British influence led to the development of India's legal system and financial markets, with efforts to establish a central bank dating back to 1773. Despite the downsides of British influence, including exploitative labor practices, the enduring links with Britain also had positive legacies. Many officials in the independent Indian government were trained at British institutions, influencing them with economic ideologies prevalent in Britain at the time. This influence is considered one of the more beneficial legacies of India's imperial relationship with Britain. In essence, the British colonial legacy left indelible marks on India's political, economic, and social landscape, shaping its trajectory in the post independence era. During British colonial rule in India, substantial investments were made in infrastructure, particularly in railways, canals, ports, and urban centers, serving commercial agricultural production and military activities. However, this infrastructure was narrowly focused and did not prioritize the overall development of the general population. Instead, it primarily served commercial, manufacturing, and military objectives, neglecting investments in primary education and healthcare facilities. The legacy of British infused infrastructure has been criticized for potentially hindering the country's development rather than fostering economic growth. A significant portion of British investment in Indian infrastructure was utilized to facilitate the extraction of resources from India back to Britain. India, considered a major asset for Britain, contributed a significant share of its GDP through trade, taxes, remittances, and interest payments. This economic exploitation favored British financial interests over Indian economic welfare, leading to policies that exploited India's abundant resources endowments under the notion of comparative advantage. The resource extraction from India altered production methods and trade patterns, encouraging the production of land and labor intensive goods and transforming India into a net exporter of agricultural commodities. This shift contributed to a decline in traditional Indian industries, particularly textile production. The British Raj also led to the deindustrialization of India, as it responded to the industrialization of more technologically advanced economies and integrated into the world market in a subservient position. Colonial policies reinforced a transition from food to non food export crops, increasing the vulnerability of many regions to widespread famine. Despite improvements in production technology in the Lancashire cotton industry, the decline in traditional industry persisted. The British colonial legacy also opened up the Indian subcontinent to international trade and capital flows, increasing India's integration into the world economy. However, the newly independent Indian government post 1947 adopted protectionist policies, withdrawing from the world economy. Now, let's have a look on the challenges of colonial legacies in development administration. The influence of colonial legacies on the emergence of development administration, specifically examining how colonialism facilitated the establishment of administrative states and their bureaucratic apparatus in former colonies. The focus centers on institutional development, particularly within the administrative state, impacting planning and program development in African, Asian, and Latin American nations. The imperative for effective institutions, broadly defined to encompass the structures and behaviors of the administrative state, is acknowledged as crucial for addressing complex challenges in the post independence and contemporary periods. The legacy of colonialism is notably marked by institutional weakness in former colonies, a factor contributing to substantial issues in both immediate post independence phases and the present era. As cogently put by Gant, administration in newly independent countries was sadly wanting in its capacities to meet these demands of independence. Bureaucracies faced with new, staggering, and unfamiliar tasks they were not set up to perform were further weakened by the overly rapid replacement of experienced expatriate personnel with inexperienced recruits and by inexperienced and often inept leadership. In almost every such country, the immediate consequence of independence was the lessening of administrative efficiency and bureaucratic effectiveness. Administration for development was required to evolve from that point. These deficiencies arose primarily from colonial policies focused on governing these nations in non developmental, extractive ways, serving the interests of the colonizers rather than the colonies. In Africa, for instance, the established administrative systems aimed to safeguard colonial powers' interests, emphasizing functions like maintaining law and order, tax collection, and providing limited services, mainly to facilitate exploitation and impede colonial development. Consequently, post independence administration inherited vast developmental needs without the necessary preparation. Development administration emerged as the mechanism for modernizing these former colonies. However, early scholars of development administration underestimated the challenges faced by these nations, leading to differing opinions on how development should proceed and resulting in a deadlock in defining development administration. The core issue was the continued Western centric nature of development administration, primarily an American tool, aligned with aid programs that lacked colonial administrative experience. Consequently, Western oriented perspectives were uncritically adopted in these colonies, hindering the success of development administration and giving rise to what is now termed development management. Hirschman identifies four key reasons why development administration fell short in transforming former colonies. Firstly, he notes its American centric nature, with the conceptualization of development predominantly stemming from an American perspective, leaving post colonial bureaucrats overwhelmed and excluded from the proposed concepts. Secondly, the intense focus on reforming administrative states in former colonies led to self questioning and doubt, as few proposals were seriously attempted or succeeded, creating a disconnection between scholars' vision and reality. This, in turn, opened a rift between theoreticians and practitioners, making even necessary reforms controversial and irresolvable. Thirdly, conflicting views on technical assistance for public administration in developing countries emerged due to recurrent failures and negative responses, casting doubt on the effectiveness of such assistance. The suspicion towards American oriented thinking further strained relations, prompting a search for alternative approaches and ultimately leading to the abandonment of development administration. Now, dear students, let's finally conclude this lecture. The colonial legacy has had a profound and enduring impact on the development trajectories of nations that once grappled with colonial rule. The struggle for effective development administration in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America reflects the ongoing challenge of reconciling historical legacies with contemporary aspirations. Scholars like Heck and Hirschman emphasize the persisting consequences of colonialism, shaping the maturity, performance, and development of formerly colonized nations. While debates persist on the overall impact of the colonial legacies, it's clear that these historical imprints continue to influence administrative states, economic structures, and social dynamics. The case study of India illustrates how British colonial policies left indelible marks on land tenure, economic ideologies, and institutional frameworks, influencing the country's post independence development path. Similarly, the analysis of infrastructure investments in former colonies reveals how colonial priorities focused on extractive goals continue to shape developmental challenges. Ultimately, the exploration of colonial legacies and development administration underscores the complexity of navigating historical imprints in the pursuit of equitable and sustainable development. While the resilience of colonial legacies is evident, the evolving nature of global dynamics and the agency of post colonial nations in shaping their destinies provide avenues for addressing the challenges posed by historical influences. As nations continue to grapple with the legacies of the past, the pursuit of effective development administration remains a dynamic and evolving endeavor, requiring nuanced approaches that acknowledge historical context and aspirations for a better future. So, dear students, I hope you gained significant information about colonial legacy on development administration. See you soon with another lecture. Till then, take care and goodbye.